This is Transfiguration Sunday, and it is probably one of the most rich texts that we're going to deal with for the entire year. There's something magical and mystical about Transfiguration, and it's got historical, critical points of view. It's got theological meaning. It's got cultural meaning. It's got pastoral meaning. So rather than spend time just doing one of those, I'm going to be a generalist and cover it all because there's so much in here that we can take away. And this should be a place to start, not a place to end in your exploration of Transfiguration. Right off the hop, we've got Jesus 6 days after. 6 days after what? And this is one of the problems with the lectionary, is that it drops you into the middle of a story. It doesn't kind of give you the before and after to really contextualize yourself. And that's kind of my job. So 6 days after, Jesus tells them he's going to Jerusalem to die. Now imagine your best friend, your rabbi, your mentor, the one you're following, your teacher tells you they're going to die. You're not in the best frame of mind. They're wanting to support, they're not wanting how. For the first half of the book of Mark, we've been looking at Jesus' ministry. And quite frankly, up until this week, we hadn't even gotten out of chapter 1 yet to talk about all the healings and ministry and teachings and whatnot. And we're kind of jettisoned immediately into the first part of first passages in part 2. So from here on, everything is focused to Jerusalem. Just like in the first part, Jesus spends his 40 days immediately in the desert. We'll deal with that next week. But these are amazing opportunities for reflection in both sections of Jesus' ministry. And Mark invites us in to do that. So we are at the beginning of part 2. Jesus has just told his friends that he's going to die. And it doesn't take them much to figure out it's going to be a political death. It's going to be because of who he is, what he has taught. So the ground is already uncomfortable among these folks. So Jesus takes 3 of his closest up to a mountaintop. Now, in Hebrew culture, mountaintops are often where you meet God. Moses goes up the mountain. Elijah goes up the mountain. Abraham goes up the mountain. This is standard throughout Middle Eastern culture of the time. Mountains are where people prayed. Even we've got through the Gospels. Jesus goes up the mountain to pray, maybe in solitude, but it's always up. So right away we know that Jesus is trying to get closer to God. And he starts to explain things to these friends of his who, gotta love the disciples. They're like the characters in any story who makes it easier for the reader to understand what's going on. They always get it wrong. They always have the wrong response. They almost never can follow through. And if by chance one of them gets it right, almost immediately they get it wrong afterwards. And this is one of those instances where Peter gets it wrong, and he's usually the one that does. So they go up there, and they're all together, and Jesus has just told them horrible things, and who knows what they're expecting is going to happen next. And then Jesus stands there, and the figures of Elijah and Moses come and stand with Jesus. Now, the significance to that in Hebrew thought is that Moses represented the laws. It was believed back in that day, and it's believed by some even today, that Moses composed the first 5 books of the Bible. Historically, that wasn't possible, but it's still a theological principle many hold on to. So we have Moses embodying the law, the rules of the Hebrew tradition. Then we have Elijah, almost the quintessential prophet, chased out of town, risen, didn't die like we understood. He was the one person before Jesus who was risen, ascended. So he didn't actually have a typical death. And Elijah represented all the prophets. And if you know anything about the Hebrew Bible, the first part is the laws, the second part is the prophets, and the third part is the worship resources, the special teachings, the songs, the proverbs. So we have the first 2 representatives, the law and the prophets, which is what all of the Hebrew tradition is based upon. the prophets were often the ones that challenged assumptions, that said, take care of the poor, that talked about God being love, talked about God being not impressed, so clean up your act. That's who the prophets were. So we have Moses, the law. We have Jesus, Son of God, person of love. And we have the prophets challenging, telling people what to do, what not to do, to be in right relationship with God. And Peter, our apostle who does the wrong thing all the time, stands up and says, oh, you're all here. Let's build shrines to you. Some translations talk about building places, huts. And right away, it's the wrong thing to do. Now, Mark gives us Peter an out. He says Peter was just so nervous and anxious and scared he didn't know what to say, which, you know what? Yeah, I can buy that. And then this cloud comes. Now, cloud is another representation of God. Whenever you see a cloud in the sky, Jesus' own ascension was with clouds. Clouds are God. So the mountain is closer to God, and clouds are God coming in to give a pronouncement. And God said, this one, focusing on Jesus, is the beloved, the Messiah, the Christ, whatever language we want to use to identify. Christ is Greek, Messiah is Hebrew. Off the top, I can't remember what the Latin is, but it's all the same thing. And identifying Jesus as the chosen one. Now, this is where we have to walk really, really careful as Christians. This has often been used to dismiss the Hebrew culture altogether, to say the laws and the prophets have absolutely no meaning anymore. It's all about Jesus. Not true. Jesus continues to be in the Hebrew culture with the laws and the prophets. All this is telling us theologically is to prioritize that Jesus, the message Jesus brings, is built on the law and prophets. Doesn't make it disappear, but it brings a new understanding that we as Christians have to hear and have to understand. Getting bogged down in rules, getting bogged down in fear of what might happen if we do the wrong things is not the way to go. That we want to be paying attention to the one who showed us through his lifestyle how to minister to those around us. Which brings us into our third consideration, pastoral implications. People who are a little more socially aware cannot miss the word trans in this title. Trans means to change from one place to another. If you're Canadian, you know the Trans Canada. It transplants you to one part of the country to another part of the country. Transubstantiation, if you know anything about Catholic traditions, changes the bread and the wine into the body and blood. Transcontinental, it was a railway that transported people from one part of Europe to another. Trans is change. Transgender in our culture, of course, is people going from the biological gender of their body into the gender that they feel is most authentic and depicts them accurately. Trans means change. Figuration is about our appearance, how we show ourselves, how we physically are in the world. So transfiguration is about changing who we are. Transgender, anybody who identifies as trans can find so much richness and wealth in this. And I have the privilege of having many trans and queer friends who've kind of enlightened me about this along the way. Here's a passage that shows that the Bible is so accepting to transformation and change. The queer community needs to hear that message. And for those of us who are not queer, those of us who identify as cis, so just a stop on those for those who are not familiar with those terms. A friend of mine who studied biochemistry years ago explained this to me. Trans is change, cis means something stays the same. So for those of us who are cis, so we've got nothing about us that physically we need to change. For us to hear this message of transformation is a spiritual message. Not the physical message that trans folks hear, but they can hear the spiritual message too. I mean, they're human. Transfiguring, transforming our spiritual sensibility. We can be better. And this is one of the joys of going through the liturgical year and the cycle, and we always come to Transfiguration right before Lent, because it gives us an opportunity, a reminder that we can change, that if there's something about us that doesn't work for us, this is something that we realize we've been doing that we shouldn't be doing, we are invited annually into this process of change. Like Jesus, we can put on a cloak of dazzling brightness, something that shows that we get it this time around, maybe something new that we didn't understand before. We are all have this capability. And then Jesus does the ultimate pastoral thing. They want to remain on the mountaintop. I mean, who doesn't want a mountaintop experience? It's incredible. It's theophany. It's transforming. It's the highest high. But anybody who's been in those moments knows they can't last. They can't possibly last if they're going to be that phenomenal an experience. If we could get there all the time, it wouldn't be that great. And Jesus says we can't stay there. We got to go down. And so they come back down because they've got to explain to the people what happened. Now, this is Mark, and this is Jesus saying to the disciples, don't tell anybody anything until after the resurrection. So again, we're given an opportunity and a window to see into what's going on in Mark's mind and in his community, where people are still told that this message is for us as the hearers, not necessarily for those characters who are actually participating in the story. But as the hearers, we get the spoiler. We know what's coming. We know what change can look like. We know how to be transformed and what that means of us and what that's calling us to be. So we have an incredibly rich gospel that at the end of the day, if your only takeaway is that transforming is a God-given experience, then you got it. Through prayer, through meditation, and our relationship with God, God can call us to change. We don't have to be who we've always been. We don't have to be restricted by the culture we were raised in. If we don't have to be limited by what society puts on us with assumptions. Because of our relationship with Jesus, because of our relationship with God, we can be and are expected to be changed people. Jesus was transfigured. We can be transformed. The main thing is that we look to change. We look to doing things better. And even though God is the author of that change, it's up to us to develop the habits that embody that. And this is one of the reasons why this is the last story we hear in Epiphany before we go into Lent, a season of reflection and also change. A season that asks us to find something in ourselves that we want to work on. We are given this opportunity and this promise that it's possible. Each of us has in us the grace of God to change who we are. If we're not satisfied, we can change. If we are hurting those we love, we can change. If we are making choices that are constantly make us self-abuse, we can change. If we're in a cultural environment or a work environment that is just not working for us and the stress is paramount and we don't know what to do, the promise is we can change. With the grace of God, we can become new people. That's the promise of Transfiguration. It is so rich, so full, and so accessible.